Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And on this warm, or rather not so warm outside, but very chilly November evening, welcome to the Royal Institution. And on behalf of the Centre for Entrepreneurs, a hugely warm welcome to our inaugural annual lecture. Very little needs to be said about this extraordinary space. In 1799, it opens its doors to teach the public about science and to demonstrate new technologies. If I'm honest, I don't know what the housekeeping instructions would have been in 1799. Perhaps, ladies and gents, please extinguish your pipes, including you, Mr. Faraday. No, I don't care what you call that Bunsen burner, you too. In 1825, the inaugural Christmas lecture took place where I'm standing today. And so what better place to welcome you for our inaugural Centre for Entrepreneurs lecture. And let me just say one thing about our guests this evening. It's wherever you have come from, you are hugely welcome. I know it's going to be a special evening when I see in the audience Sir Tim Berners-Lee. And looking around in every row, I see Herman Hauser. I see Kanya King. I see Sahar Hashemi. I see Jason Stockwood, some of our most iconic and celebrated entrepreneurs gathered here. And I hope you're going to have a fabulous evening. Of course, we're not expecting a fire, but if we do have the drill, or rather have the alarm go off, please exit through these green signs just on the ground floor here, and all will be well. We'll meet on the ground floor in Albemarle Street. A couple of quick introductions to get the ball rolling, ladies and gents. And please do share, because we're a full house tonight, so please do share on CFE Lecture as we go through. Many of you know that the Centre for Entrepreneurs has recently joined forces with the New Entrepreneurs Foundation. And it's a great pleasure to welcome to the stage the founder of the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, now its chairman, and the chairman of the Centre for Entrepreneurs. Please give a warm Royal Institution welcome to Oliver Paul.
Thank you, Ollie, and from me, a very warm welcome. It's lovely to see so many extraordinary businessmen, entrepreneurs here tonight. I came early, and who did I find? It was Herman Hauser. He was working away, and I said, "What are you up to, Herman?" And he explained that he's just backing a company called GraphCore, which has the most powerful chip in the world. So you heard it here. Watch out for GraphCore. So, Herman, good luck with that. The Centre for Entrepreneurs came together with the New Entrepreneurs a year ago. And the aim is really twofold. Firstly, to promote entrepreneurship in all its form through powerful advocacy. And recently, we published a report on entrepreneurship for refugees. And I'm delighted to confirm that the government has accepted our recommendations, and they are going to be financing a pilot training program, and hugely important. A lot of refugees in this country, some of them very talented, places Syria and others, who with some training and some education will be actually starting their own businesses. Secondly, our aim is to develop and support young entrepreneurs who have the ambition and drive to build major new businesses that will create the jobs and the wealth of the future, and really to help Britain become a leading force in the knowledge economy. We've had, through our program, 240 young entrepreneurs. They've started 115 businesses, disrupting their respective sectors. They've raised over 55 million in seed capital and have created over 1,600 new jobs. So why are we launching an annual lecture? We feel it's very important to celebrate the positive impact of entrepreneurship, not just for the economy, but for society. We hope that this lecture will provide an annual platform for world-class founders and leaders to make the case for entrepreneurship. So it's very fitting that this inaugural lecture will be delivered by Eric Schmidt, one of the most inspirational entrepreneurs in the world today. Thank you, Eric. I want to thank our sponsors who support our work. We are immensely grateful to those for supporting this event. Letter One, who are our lead sponsor, Quantum Black, Corn Ferry, and Accenture. We also have a wonderful group of corporate and individual sponsors, many of whom are here today, who help us year in and year out. I think a special mention particularly goes to McKinsey, who were there at the start. And when we founded the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, they were the first people not just to support us with finance, but to actually help us and put a board member onto the foundation to advise us. I also want to thank the NEF and the CFE team, particularly Nita Patel, our chief executive. We also have here most of the trustee board members, so thanks to them, and lots of NEF alumni who are dotted around the room. So please seek them out after the lecture. They're all wearing a pink lanyard, and they are, as you will find out, all developing and building very exciting young businesses. And finally, I just want to thank Mervyn Davis, the chairman of our advisory board. Mervyn supported me at the very beginning. He was the first person who actually said, I think this is a great idea. I'm going to support you. And he, in fact, got his friends at Diageo to, I think, make the first donation. And since then, he's been a huge source of wisdom and friendship. So thank you very much, Mervyn. So now over to the lecture. So Ollie, back to you to introduce Eric. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Okay. Thank you, Oliver. Ladies and gents, the moment you've been waiting for. It's a great honour to welcome our guest lecturer to London and to the Royal Institution. I mentioned 1799, I mentioned 1825. Perhaps I can mention 1998, the year in which a very special business was born. That business was Google. And in 2001, our guest lecturer took the reins as its chief executive. He played that role for a decade before taking over as chairman until this year. We are absolutely delighted that Eric can join us for our inaugural Centre for Entrepreneurs lecture. Today, he's technology advisor to Alphabet, he's a writer, he's a philanthropist, and we're honored and delighted to say he is the giver of the inaugural Centre for Entrepreneurs lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge London welcome to Eric Schmidt.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you, guys. What I like about this audience is I know so many people in the room. So thank you all, my friends, for coming. And those of you who don't, I hope I don't, or not, I don't know yet, I hope I don't disappoint. I'm here because I believe in entrepreneurship. And I'll just succinctly, I hope, say that I think virtually all of the problems that Britain has, and that Europe has, and that the world has, can be solved by more entrepreneurship. So why don't we start right now by having more entrepreneurship? And I can give you the arguments, but I think they're pretty self-evident. I've been thinking about the sort of a time in Britain, sort of an extraordinary time, a moment when a lot of people were worried about this country's place in Europe and the world, all these various challenges, social, economic, political, leaders who peddle simple answers to those challenges that come from a world of growing complexity, science and technology transforming people's lives in all sorts of ways, the way people manufacture, trade, and operate, and the way institutions function. I mean, things are really threatened at this point. Many of these changes are driven from technology changes that are extraordinary. They really do affect the institutions around them, and they've made life better, but they've opened up some old wounds in society. Now, of course, you think I'm about to say the word that starts with a B. As an aside, if this is a great time to be an introvert, because even introverts can make small talk about Brexit. I'm talking about the Babbage word. I'm talking about the industrial age. 150 to 200 years ago, Britain went through a very similar transformation, and we today celebrate this extraordinary achievement from your ancestors and your country. without reference to all of this terrible dislocation and so forth, because the benefits so outweighed the then temporary costs. And I think it's important to remember that society doesn't sit still, right? That the world is not organized to be static. And as societies evolve, they seem to prefer static to non-static. They seem to want the same every year, which is precisely not how humanity works, and it's also not how we got to where we are today. I don't know about you, but I actually like the invention of the train. Thank you very much, Britain. I like the invention of electricity. Thank you, Britain. I can go on. What about basic science? What about physics? There's like a long list. All of those things make the modern computing world possible, and it's important to sort of give that credit. So it seems to me that adapting to the changing norms in the way we work, and the way it worked in the transformation of industries and public services and realignment in European and global order, occupied by the intellectual energies of Britain's smartest people, is the project that we all face today. So at this point, Britain and Europe and the United States and so forth all face these sort of big challenges. Remember that you've made it before. The fundamental strengths that Great Britain has have not gone away, right? It's not like you lost the formula, right? The formula is still there, you just haven't sort of emphasized it enough. And I want to review some elements of what that formula looks like at the moment. And I think that one of the keys of that formula, and perhaps the starting key, is that of entrepreneurship. These revolutions don't happen by accident. They happen when a series of things combine with luck and skill, and innovation occurs that then one thing is built or another. Economists call this combinatorial innovation. That this piece plus this piece plus this piece. You know, the GPS was invented in the 70s in various ways, popularized in the 90s, became commercially available in the 90s. Chips were developed that could actually use the GPS. The GPS ends up in people's smartphones. Right, the smartphone revolution plus the GPS enables a very large category of applications that you use today without even remembering that you didn't have this facility 10 years ago. And when you were growing up, you could not have imagined having such a powerful facility. And your children today will say, how did you all get around? And they said, the answer is they were printed maps. Okay, they actually existed. And I coveted them, and I used to have a whole pile. And they go, Dad, you look like an old person. Right, that's sort of how society works. So people like this, transformative ideas and skills and organizations and networks are what really do it. And what I want to talk about and emphasize is that Britain can do this again, that Britain can raise a new generation of entrepreneurs. So I'll give you some examples. Imagine if a job seeker in this country had access to the equivalent of Google Maps for jobs, right, where you could sort of find the jobs that are near you, right, because people don't like to move that much. Housing prices are high. It's difficult. They have other family commitments and so forth and so on. Finding a tool around every job and educational opportunity available to you. Let's use another one. Why don't we have for every student a personal tutor, independent of their income, right? So a kindergartner has a plush toy that helps them develop language, bonding, and so forth. My favorite, which is 8th grade math. 8th grade math is the point where people sort of discover if they love math or hate math. This is a loving math crew, and you're self-selected, and there's an equivalent audience in another room that would say they hated. And so I want to increase my odds on our side of having more of you, right, to have our entrepreneurship as part of that. Why is that not a computer AI system that's there to help you, right, through the challenges? Because trust me, it was hard for me, and I'm sure it was hard for you, and it's really hard for other people. Why don't we use the techniques from astronomy, which involves looking very, very far and very, very, very distant in time, to look at cancer in the body? Why are we not repurposing these algorithms and approaches to solve medical solutions? Imagine if we could model the future of natural ecosystems, environments with enough precision that we could respond in time to preserve them, right? That the simulation is fast enough and accurate enough that we can see the changes. Imagine if we could restore the ocean's biomass, at least in part of it, to the amount of biomass that was there before humans showed up, right? Keep going. Imagine if you could make the efficiency of renewable systems in energy, twice as high as they are today, through algorithmic improvements in grid distribution and so forth. These are all projects that either Google is doing, that friends of mine are funding, that my foundation is funding, or that entrepreneurs I know here are doing them. That isn't the point is that if you follow that, why can't we solve all of these problems right now, right? We might as well take the combinatoric innovation, all these platforms we've built, and let's solve them one by one, all in parallel. I think it's possible. So I think that you need to, I don't mean to sound too harsh here, it's important to get over a little bit of that British natural skepticism. When I show up, I'm sort of the American optimist, which I guess I really am. But let's be a little bit more optimistic, right? We'll practice together. Let's make a list of the stuff that we can actually do with these tools, and then let's organize the super smart people from here and around the world, and people want to be here for all sorts of reasons, and do it. Now there are plenty of examples of this. If you go back to the early 90s, a group of folks at the National Science Foundation and a number of other groups in America decided that they wanted to have some digital libraries. And it was clear that computers could organize libraries, and they were disaggregated in all sorts of interesting ways. So the National Science Foundation, DARPA, and NASA invented this sort of program around digital libraries. And at the time, basically, nothing was digital from the library perspective. They funded a set of programs. One of those programs was at Stanford. It turns out 2 young graduate students were, among other things, funded and inspired by that work. Those 2 young graduate students became the founders of Google today, which is surely the largest such library, right? Now, how long is that period? Is that 30 years? Pretty good. We'll take it. Let's look at here, right? We've already talked about the extraordinary achievement of Tim Berners-Lee, my hero, and here in the audience, and you all know what he has done. Let's talk about an even more recent achievement with DeepMind. So 3 founders out of Cambridge in 2010 formed a company, and they had a goal of building human-level intelligence. And what was interesting about them, and if they'd asked me, I would have said it was a terrible idea, because they weren't computer scientists, they were neuroscientists. And what could they possibly know about computers? Well, they obviously understand the brain, but the brain is super squishy, and God knows, none of us understand it. Well, it turns out that neuroscience had moved to the point where they began to understand the underlying algorithms that actually allow us to think. I figured, okay, no problem. They managed to get their company going, and they managed to make some progress in games that had never been done before. And what they did was they took pictures of a television, essentially, and from the raw bits, they could figure out what the game was and how to win it and beat humans. Well, that's pretty interesting. And the techniques that they used were not the traditional ones. They were neural in their nature, because, of course, they were neuroscientists. So that's pretty interesting. So along the way, DeepMind became part of Google, and they set out their objective of winning at the game of Go. Now, Go is not a game that people here play very much, but it's the hardest game in the world, probably, played heavily in Asia. And they set out to do it. It took 2 years to build a system with a series of networks, which are 2 different networks, which had different kind of evaluation functions. And the way they did it is they trained using lots of human games, by the way, 30 million to be precise, which is an awful lot of games. And learning from that, they learned how to play. And they beat first a Korean, and then the top person in the world, a Chinese leader. This was now 2 years ago. What is often missed in this narrative is that their real goal was not to win at Go, but to build something very different. And so they developed a product called AlphaZero. And AlphaZero can learn from no information and win the game of Go against any human being in approximately 7 days. Now that's an achievement. That tells you that these people sitting in Cambridge, right, could ultimately be the most important innovation that Britain has ever done. They may be on their way, right, to inventing aspects of human intelligence that have evaded even all the computer scientists and so forth. We don't know. Now, did they start off with an ambitious goal? Yes, but they had a plan, and their first plan was to do gaming because they sort of figured it out. I tell those 2 stories, the Google's founding story and the DeepMind founding story, because it shows you that we take these things for granted. It's like, oh yeah, Google's been around forever. Google's 20 years old, right? It wasn't here before 1998. Trust me, I know. And by the way, DeepMind wasn't here until 2010. I know, right? So we forget how recent some of these extraordinary achievements are. So anyway, I'll keep going. With respect to entrepreneurship, there's going to be enormous gains in the fusion of AI and advanced computing, new technologies in VR and AR, advances in biotechnology and personalized medicine, in robotics and new transportation, right? Those are just the sort of big categories with many others. It just seems to me that what we want to do is we want to sort of create more entrepreneurs. Now you sit there and you say, well, aren't people working on all of those? Yes, but they're not solved yet, and these are huge spaces. Do you think that one self-driving car is the only one self-driving car we're going to have in the world? Of course not. There'll be many, many different takes on these things, and I can go on and on and on. And if you think about the stereotype of an entrepreneur, and this is sort of a key point, there's a stereotype of sort of the trendy sort of hipster type in a glamorous co-working space in Shoreditch. Now, I'm happy that Google helped establish that fiction by virtue of creating Google Campus, because I did the announcement. But that's not, in fact, how innovation works, right? That innovation occurs from everywhere. So let me be very, very clear here that diversity and inclusion and openness with respect to getting those people into your country and building teams that are of that nature is an essential nature of winning in this battle. It is not going to happen by going to one institution, hiring only those people, and only, if I can be blunt, only white males. It's not how it works. It may have worked 200 years ago. I can't speak for that. I wasn't here. But it doesn't work now. You won't win. You won't get there. And so it's very important as you establish this entrepreneurship goal that you look under the covers for the entrepreneurs because they show up from everywhere. I can tell you all the American entrepreneur stories, and all of them are unusual. Very few of them followed a normal path. They're always passionate people who have a very strong sense of what they want to do. But it seems to me that a simple rule is that they have this sort of audacious goal and this sort of ambitious and personal, and they sort of have it. And my test that I use with entrepreneurs is, are they going to do it with me or without me? In other words, they say, well, I have this idea. What do you think, Eric? That's a bad entrepreneur. The idea that I want the entrepreneur is, I'm doing this, and if you have time, I want to explain to you why I'm right. Now, that's an entrepreneur, right? And then I would say, well, did you think of that? Yes. Did I think about this? Yes. Did I think about this? Yes. Did I think about this? And then you can tell that they're lying. Yes. Right. So you see what I'm saying? But there's a particular nature of how entrepreneurs work, and they have a technical and business skills that turn things into a reality. And what's extraordinary is that they often have this at a very young time. I'll tell you the story that after Tim invented the web, I hung out with this guy, Mark Andreessen. He was all of 19. He'd built Mosaic. And he was all of 20. So we had dinner, and we had this long conversation about the business that I was in, which was enterprise, the business, enterprise software business. And I've been doing it for 20 years. And what was extraordinary to me was not his intelligence, which was paramount, but the fact that he knew everything I was doing and everything in my field and had all my wisdom. And that made me feel old, right? That's the kind of entrepreneur that I want to focus on, because those are the ones, they cannot be stopped. They're going to make this they're going to make this happen. And Britain has an unusually good number of such people sitting around. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to create, on a personal basis, I've created what you all call a venture facility for public benefit called Schmidt Futures, which is intending on focusing on some of these breakthrough discoveries of science and tech, and I'll be funding things here in Britain, and I'm already doing it in the United States. And the idea here is that it takes, you have to fund these breakthrough ideas, right? You have to get it to the point where the entrepreneur can get started, and then the rest sort of takes off. And I think that in general, there's been a market failure in how entrepreneurship is supported. I think what happens is once the entrepreneur has evolved, and once there's the seed round is there and it actually works, there's lots of venture capital, usually, although less in Britain than there should be. But what I want to do is work on the earlier side. I want to sort of get the feed and all these sort of interesting bets that are possible to then create the entrepreneurs that are happen. I think that it goes back to first the people. And what is happening now when you look at all of the funding agencies is that they tend to fund in people that they already know. A statistic in the United States is that the first grant to a principal investigator from the national science groups is at the age of 42. Now, as you know, much of the original work, much of the seminal work that people do is much younger in their career, much earlier, for many reasons, including the fact that they haven't been slowed down by knowledge in other areas. They're so focused on their research at the postdoc level. So that's an example where there's a gap that I and others can fix. But the fundamental issue is you have the sort of engines, right? And then the funders that are risk averse and the funding systems that are risk averse. We've got to find a way to get them funding earlier, to one way or another. The Center for Entrepreneurs is doing a good job. There's a foundation that supports that. There are other such examples here. I think the next observation is that people want to talk about a product when they should really talk about a network platform. And the most impressive organizations are ultimately ones which understand how networks work and they get other people to work with them. So the canonical way a startup should look like in the software space is you should have an iPhone and Android app. And by the way, it's Android first based on market share. Then a fast connection, which is easily available, and then powerful cloud computing software. And that powerful cloud computing software needs to use AI and machine learning in its work. If you build your architecture using that, then you really can begin to build network platforms and have people add value, people contribute user data and so forth, and get it tagged. There's so many ideas about building those network platforms that this is where I think a lot of the activity will be. And the barrier to entry for these startups is very, very low because the industry's now gotten itself organized. Well, they've built the smartphone, they've built the networks, they've built the cloud computing, and in fact, with TensorFlow, you now have libraries that can do image classification, reinforcement learning, and all the other techniques that people actually have to. So it's actually possible now for a young and small team, if you will, to make enormous progress very quickly on those. So the third thing that has to do with partnerships. And what happens is that this interconnection means that you have to be willing to partner fairly early. And you have to figure out in the ecosystem around you what pieces you need. So I'll give you an example. You set out to build a home care robot is a very good example. Now the market for home care robots is going to be very, very large. Well, the problem is that you need vision systems and machine learning systems and listening systems and motor systems and so forth. You're not going to be able to do it with 3 people. You're going to have to build partnerships and build the components and find the components elsewhere, and you see the point. So these interdisciplinary networks of young people are where the strength is going to be. Now, what I was trying to think about is what is here we're in Europe, how do we refer to this? And I think if we go back to the Renaissance, there were these thinkers, right? The scientists and the artists and entrepreneur who shifted our view of the world. It was an extraordinary period. So why can't we get that talent back, right? They're more human, so on a purely statistical basis, there should be more of those category of people than we have today. So we have to find them, we have to encourage them, and most importantly, we have to listen to them. They often come in odd places. They're often gifted in ways that are unusual. And again, you all know this from your studying of history. So when the sort of well-rounded European intellectual term, which sort of Renaissance man referred to at the time, I think they can be achievers in many, many different areas, and that's what I want to emphasize in my mission. Let me put it differently. No one tried to put Leonardo da Vinci into a silo, right? We need to have more such people. I call them polymaths. You can call them whatever you want, and they exist. And by the way, the British educational system is unusually good at producing these people. So I would say that you have an oversupply of candidates to do this, which is another advantage that you all have. So in this case, of course, men and women together, what would it look like? Well, think about the Human Genome Project, right? There were contributions not just from biology, but also from chemistry and obviously from computing and genetics. And of course, there was a great deal of mathematics and engineering to pull these things off. So I think that we need to, as a group, decide on a process to grow ideas and grow entrepreneurs, right? So there, you can systematize. One of the things I learned at Google is that you can't know innovation, but you can systematize it. In other words, you can see the pattern over and over again. So if you imagine that the leading universities, the leading entrepreneurs, the leading venture capitalists, and by leading universities, I mean like 10 of them, not 2 of them, figure out a way to get an innovation process where there is a constant list of new ideas, right? I'm trying to develop this, trying this personally. What are the ideas that are the ones that are most powerful? We know that they're coming, so systematize that process at the same time you systematize the production of entrepreneurs. If you do that, then the third part, which is money, is much more likely to show up, because the money will show up where the ideas and the entrepreneurs are, at least for a review. Partly because the money doesn't want to miss out on the ideas, even if they don't particularly like the idea, they'll sit there and listen to you and give you some feedback. So I'm worried for the United States and Britain that the inverse is occurring. I know the US numbers much better than I know the British numbers. In the United States, dynamism, which is defined as new company formation and motion of people from city to city, has been linearly declining for a decade. Now here you are, and you say, how can that be? All we hear about is American dynamism. I'm just telling you numerically what I just said is true. And there are many theories as to why this is. Work rules, high housing prices, 2-earner families. There's a whole bunch of theories. No one really knows. But what we do know is that at a time when the cost of starting a company is the lowest it's ever been, and the barrier to entry is the lowest it's ever been, we're not seeing the creative part. And this is true for technology and non-technology startups. By that comparison, Britain is not doing any better, right? That by the same metrics, and I can go through the numbers that I have, but basically the rate of starting of companies is lower here. It's about half in the United States. And that many people who are young who talk about it say they want to, but they don't do it. I don't know what the barriers are, but it's important that both countries get these things fixed. So my point is that when you think about your role and so forth, I would encourage you to say, is this a place where I can invest my own money, my own time? Are the ideas any good? You know, make a checklist. I think it's pretty straightforward. Do they really need to have a degree from this institution or that? How do I get the top talent? What algorithm do I use to recruit and get the smartest? So in my case, I invested in something called the Schmidt Science Fellows with the Rhodes Trust, and we created a group of scientists who are now being funded to do essentially move from field to field. I already mentioned, for example, astronomy for cancer, and there are similar other ones. We also need, as I mentioned, is to invest in the risk capital for the platforms. Right? So I'm looking for areas like that. And I think the final thing that we need to sort of conclude is to have a renaissance in systems thinking. So systems thinking can be understood as that in the age of complexity, the problems cannot be solved in any one industry or by people alone, right? And so you have to have a systems approach, and a system approach means that you have to combine from different disciplines. This is very difficult for universities who are siloed, and it's often difficult in companies because the founders are very certain, which is a good thing about founders, and they miss things. So in the early years of Google, we didn't really value the UI people that much because our UI was pretty simple and it seemed to work just fine. Today, Google and all the other tech companies have this large, UI function because the design of how these apps work is central to their adoption and their success. That's something that's changed in the field in the last decade. There are all sorts of other issues when you design these systems. What are you going to deal with both conscious and unconscious and institutional biases, right? Because you'll get caught if you actually have them and you don't police them. So let me close out with sort of a couple of observations and questions. I am convinced that entrepreneurs can pull all this off. I think that there's no question, I can go on about challenges, but sustainability and energy use, the issues of the middle class. Here's another example. Imagine if groups here figured out a way for products that would cause the British middle class to have their incomes go up in a sustainable way by 10%. Would that product be important? Yes. It would be hugely important. Would that same product be hugely successful in every other democracy? Yes. What about the autocracies? Yes. Right, so why don't we build that product, right? Why don't we fix the educational one that I described earlier? If we could double our capacity to use the intermittent renewable energy grid, think about that one. I already mentioned that one. The healthcare diagnostics and decision making, right? How do we, here you have lots of issues around the healthcare system. What if we could get the diagnostics earlier and quicker and cheaper, right? Clearly a better health outcome. And there are all sorts of evidence that we can do that. My point here is that what happens is everybody in these conversations says, oh yeah, that's all very interesting. I don't think we can wait anymore, right? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of waiting for these solutions to appear. Let's make them happen. And the path is to imagine the solution, help the entrepreneurs invent the solutions, let the market compete it out, and it will come out, and it does happen very, very quickly. If we choose to work together, right, we really can make this happen. So, I don't know. I was thinking about the history and going back to Babbage. Imagine if we could build a machine that calculate astronomical and mathematical tables to help with crucial tasks such as naval navigation. Well, that question, of course, arrived at Charles Babbage. He built a very strange machine, which you can see here in London. And of course, in 1822, became the father of computing. And working with a woman whose name was Ada Lovelace, a combination of the two ended up writing the first computer program in history here, 1843. So we've been at this a long time. Can you imagine what history would be like if those people had not been here, if they had not created the industry that I'm in? What would I be doing? What would you be doing? It's very interesting. So my point is that you have the inspiration, you have the culture, you have the history. What you need is now the entrepreneurs. And you need a lot of them. And you need to sit down. I'll give you an example. The leading universities here have thousands and thousands of postdocs, right? These are incredibly well-trained people. Let's find a way to get them to be entrepreneurs in the fields in which they're experts. Britain will benefit, the world will benefit. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, with an eye to the past, but gazing at the future with such a brimming glass half full and more. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Eric Schmidt. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
much. Eric, thank you for kindly offering to stay for a conversation now. Before I leave you in the capable hands of our next guest, I just had a personal question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Given how you spent the last decade and more of your life, what is something that you still haven't found?
I always underestimate the scale and impact of things. I always miss the next one, right? I want to get the next one right.
It's worked out.
I want to predict the answer to the questions I asked today, and I have not yet been able to do that.
Well, it's so good to see.
And I could use some help on that.
Right. Well, count us in here in Britain. Great to see you fizzing with ideas, ladies and gents. I hand over the baton to someone impeccably well-credentialed for this role, a former editor of The Times, a former director of news and current affairs at the BBC, and I'm delighted to say a newly minted entrepreneur himself. He's the co-founder of Tortoise Media. Those of us who know our ESOP know that the tortoise may have been slow, the tortoise also won. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave you in the capable hands of Mr. James Harding.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ollie.
You have a new gig, James?
I have a new gig, exactly. I'm slightly short I was listening to you and thinking I'm slightly short of the polymath qualities or of the postdoc qualifications, but I thought that if I at least dressed like an entrepreneur, you might think that I passed. I feel very privileged because there is an oversupply of polymaths in this room, and there are a bunch of people who think deeply about entrepreneurship and innovation, and I feel incredibly lucky to get a chance to sort of question you and follow up on some of the points in the lecture. And forgive me if I may, I'm going to start with the small talk. Right, as you say, we introverts can have a good time in Britain at the moment thinking about Brexit. But the fact is, when you think about the success of technology and you think about the success of Silicon Valley, that was a combination of skills and enterprise, but also strategic investment. And when you look at the future of the UK, presumably post-Brexit, there are strategic questions for this country. And I just wondered, partly with your Schmidt Futures hat on, but partly just looking at the competition in the world, where do you think the UK should make its investment strategically? How should it pay for its way in the world?
So for the last 5 years as chairman, I spent a lot of time in Europe trying to encourage entrepreneurship. And I've developed a sort of view of what the issues are. Some of them are regulations which make it hard, and governments, Britain does better than most of the European governments in this regard. But some of it is also that the leading universities are underfunded relative to the United States. So when you go to a top university anywhere in Europe, right, France, Germany, here, and so forth, it almost makes you cry to see the limited funding that is available from both the government, they're typically government-funded universities here, and also private donors. And so that's a problem for Europe and for Britain. So my answer is, I know it's pretty straightforward to say, but if you just do a comparison, right, to your aspiration, right, Europe, Britain, and the United States aspire to have very, very high qualities of life. You're not funding the basic research engines at the level that you need to, in my opinion.
And I mean, realistically, if you're not going to find the money within government, would you change the European funding mechanisms, the way in which actually Europeans could give to universities? Because the truth is, that's the system in the States.
And the United States, as everybody here knows, the United States is very, very fortunate to have this large donor philanthropy, which is not as prevalent in Europe. Anything that can be done to make that much easier. And all of the European business people that I know are very willing and able to participate, that they understand that they have to give back. But it's harder in Europe, it's harder in Britain. That needs to get addressed.
And there was a different element, because one of the things you said was there's a problem with emphasizing the formula. Right? You said the UK still has the formula, the UK still has a wealth of extremely talented scientists, engineers, innovators. But I think that people in the UK have been worried for some time about this point, emphasizing the formula. Can we scale our own innovations? That's not a university problem. That's a problem in business, and presumably also in the allocation of capital. Why is that a problem in the UK?
Well, I think you're an expert on Britain and I am not, but let me observe that Israel, which is a smaller country, right, has a much more dynamic innovation center than Britain, which invented it all, right? So there's a straightforward question. How do you become more like Israel in the innovation aspect? And you sit there and go, well, they're different, what have you. Well, the fact of the matter is they're very export-oriented, right? Scandinavia, which has a smaller innovation engine than Britain, got successful in some categories because they were completely focused on exports, right? So independent, I don't know what the future for Britain holds, but I'm sure that all of the companies that will be successful in Britain will be global companies.
Okay, that's...
So the way to think about it is, if you're a British firm, you're recruiting globally, you're producing for a global market, and ideally you're going to have operations everywhere.
Okay.
And Heathrow will get you pretty much anywhere you want.
Certainly will.
You've solved the transportation problem, you've solved the interconnection problem. The only thing that you need to do is to have global businesses that follow.
Okay, so can I step back and just look differently? One of the things that I think hovered over your lecture this evening was the relationship between politics and entrepreneurship, and particularly, if you like, society and technology. Something has clearly happened in the last couple of years the relationship between the valley and the hill, between Silicon Valley and Capitol Hill, has seriously soured. I just wanted to get a sense from you of, when you think about the issue about jobs and disruption to work, about tax and animosity towards technology companies on that, and more recently, of course, to data and concern about democracy, how do you think technology and innovators in technology restore public confidence in their relationship with politics?
Some of these are related to the fact that the U.S. companies have gotten very, very large and are growing faster than their competitors. Some of these are related to differences in culture. But I don't think that they prevent innovation. They may increase the cost of innovation in certain cases, but they don't prevent it. So if you take an innovation bias, I don't think that the current regulatory tensions and so forth and so on are preventing people from trying to invent better renewable solutions, better food crop systems and so forth. I see more of that, not less. I spent lots of time in government meetings about all of this. And each of the categories and companies and problems is different. But I don't think that, I certainly did not believe that the tech industry would be absent government regulation. I was assumed that it would arrive.
So you're in the sort of Tim Cook camp, which is it's time for tech regulation?
No, well, he was talking about some very specific regulation. I'm saying that I did not think that we as an industry could just do what we wanted.
But I suppose that's interesting, because you're talking about the scale of the companies and the dominance questions. I suppose I'm trying to make the link between the sense of public uncertainty, even anxiety, about the extent to which technology is going to, let's start with a simple thing, disrupt jobs, put people out of work. Where are you on the spectrum of people who say, actually, innovation will create new levels of employment, and we're moving to a world where we're going to see a different kind of leisure time, a different relationship with work? So
I think we actually know the answer to that question. One of the examples we always use is a British example, which has to do with the invention of the loom. That's sort of, economists always talk by what happened. And there was a generational impact, right? People did lose their jobs, and it was difficult, and there were a series of social responses to that. But I think we're pretty happy that the loom was invented, right? For all the reasons that are obvious.
Do you think that? Just the reason why I just pause is because there's some people who say, look, people draw the comparison with the Industrial Revolution, but the scale and the pace of innovation and disruption is different this time.
I don't think that it's any different, and I'll tell you why. There's the first place in. It's easier if I use U.S. examples, so I apologize. In the United States, there's essentially zero unemployment, and the unemployment that exists is because of various problems involving where jobs are versus people, but it's essentially as low as it can be. That is after enormous warnings about loss of all the jobs in the United States, right? That somehow all of these industries are going to be eliminated. And I can tell you that the future is that there's going to be a much larger number of empty jobs than people to fill them. And here's why. Very easy to understand. Is Britain aging?
Yes.
Yeah. Is Europe aging? Is China aging? Is Japan aging? Is the United States aging? All of these are countries where the replacement rate is less than 2.1. The United States, by the way, which used to be near 2, has gone down to 1.8. So again, even America, with her at least historic embracing of immigration, has seen a degradation in that. So there's something called the dependency ratio, which is the relationship of the number of people working and the people who are retired or ill or what have you. As more people retire in Britain, which they will, or they get ill, which we don't want them to, but eventually they will as they get older, there are going to be a smaller number of people as a percentage working to support the systems that keep them going. This is true in China, in Japan, and so forth, in all of Europe. How do we solve that problem? We have to make the people who are working more productive. What is the best way to make the people who are working more productive? Get them more automation, right? That's how manufacturing went from being very hands intensive, right, in the industrial era, to now much more roboticized. Farming, right? America was 90% farming. Now it's 2%, right, over 100 years. That was largely mechanization, literally the harvesters and things like that. I think that all of the analysis, so you sit there and you go, well, I don't believe any of that. Well, I think the numbers that I just told you are true. So it maybe it's possible that there will be unemployment of all these productive people and then lots of old people. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay. Now, I'll give you another statistic. When you look at automation, people have studied this very carefully. Automation is about tasks, not jobs, right? So until the point where the robot shows up and can replace you and me on stage, which is not anytime soon, and maybe not for a very long time, right? The issues have to do with replacing essentially routine tasks, freeing up people to be more productive. So far the evidence is that people on balance do better working with computers. Their salaries are higher, their emotional happiness overall is higher, et cetera, et cetera.
So we've got a limited amount of time, so I just want to ask two very quick things, if you like. They're actually big questions, but I will ask them quickly. The first is you made a big point about diversity and about the kinds of people that are attracted into new companies that entrepreneurs look for. But when you look at what's happened in the culture of Silicon Valley companies, one of the complaints is that it's not that different from the Royal Institution of 200 years ago, that actually it's been a very male-dominated culture. Why has that been the case, and how does that change?
Well, we've worked hard, as an industry, we worked very, very hard to be diverse. And the most frequent thing that happens when people walk down the hallways in our buildings is they notice how different all the names are, right? So one aspect of diversity is people from all around the world, and we've clearly achieved that. We're working very hard on male, female, and underrepresented minorities, and we've made gains there. There's reasons to be optimistic. If you look in the United States, again, I'm sorry not to know the British numbers, but I assume it's similar. The top 10 universities, the top major in every case is computer science. Interesting. Wasn't true even 5 years ago. Of those top universities, essentially all of them have 50-50 relationships, male and female. So I think in one generation, this bias, which we're fighting against, will have corrected itself.
Okay. And here's the final one. Do you still think there is a link between democracy and innovation?
It depends on how well the democracy is run.
Right, there goes plans for dinner. I think we'll be here for a while.
No, but I mean, you can imagine democracies which really, really screw this up.
All right, come on, Eric. We can't. Hang on. I know we're about to end, but I guess our question is, we're all incredibly anxious about the idea, not all of us, but a lot, about the idea that our politics is short-term and that the things that we need to be thought about strategically.
But this is not a new problem.
No, I appreciate that. The question
Politics is always, in the United States, like, talk about short-term, oh my God.
Yes, no,
somehow we managed to get through the last few years.
But the question I've got really is about, is China going to be better at this than Western democracies like the UK and the US?
Well, I would say it somewhat differently. I think we've never had a really scalable competitor to the democratic ideal. And China may be such a competitor. We don't know yet. It's too early to say. But we've always assumed, all of us, the Renaissance people in the room, have always said, well, there's only one way to do it. And the Chinese model is just different. It's a much more government-centric, much more planned model. And they're doing well.
All right. Well, quoting Zhou Enlai and with a nod to all the Renaissance people in the room, ladies and gentlemen, please give an enormously warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to
Thank you. Well, thank you both. My huge thanks to you both. Ladies and gents, James is a man who knows deadlines well, and I know I speak for many of you when I say I wish we had longer with you both this evening. But once more, James and Eric, thank you again for that amazing conversation. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time together is almost over in terms of the formalities. I want to welcome someone to the stage whose presence I've sensed on many occasions behind some phenomenal initiatives, including the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, which he co-founded, and indeed the Centre for Entrepreneurs, for which he chairs the advisory board. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lord Davies.
I'm going to be very quick. There are a number of entrepreneurs in the room, and you know, there's a 24-year-old young man that Ollie and I have invested in, and I hope you're going to make us a lot of money. But many of you have created extraordinary companies, but you know, there's one person apart from Eric that I want to celebrate this evening. I don't think you can go to an event like this where Tim Berners-Lee is there and not absolutely give a standing ovation. Because, before you do, Ollie mentioned that, you know, when this institution was founded, and whether it's in 25 years or whether it's 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, Tim, you will be celebrated. Everybody will just talk about you. They will also talk about you, Eric. And so, just as equally, But honestly, for us as an audience, we are very privileged to have two giants here this evening. But I want the first round of applause to be for Tim Berners-Lee. Now, the second round of applause can be a very quick one, because he's an ex-journalist. James Harding, thank you very much. I know him too well. My final thank you, really, if you could step forward. What I would like to do is I'd like to set you, Eric and Tim, is celebrated. If you could sort that out, thank you very much. You know, I want to finish with one little anecdote involving my family. When you come from Wales and become a grandparent, you're called Tide. And my granddaughter is 5, lives in Hong Kong. Her first tooth fell out, and basically there can be no greater celebration of the company that, you know, you were so extraordinary in, is that my granddaughter, I said, the Tooth Fairy was called, and I basically said to her, you know, how much? And she said, oh, Tidy, don't worry, I can Google to find out how much. So, inspiring, insightful, absolute privilege for us to be. You're an entrepreneur, you're a philanthropist, and what we need to do with that speech and with the Q&As, we need to send it to Westminster.
I suspect that they're busy at the moment doing something else.
I know, but to quote you, all the problems will be sorted by innovation. Exactly. Eric, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Great privilege. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Lord Davies. Ladies and gentlemen, our time together this evening draws to a close. A final mention to two extraordinary individuals who in my experience, deliberately shy away from the spotlight. I want to reference Neeta Patel and Matt Smith, who between them lead the New Entrepreneurs Foundation and the Centre for Entrepreneurs. I was rather drawn to Eric's comment about the great innovators not being slowed down by knowledge in other areas. And I wish I'd had that line to hand when I was at school, I must say, to distract myself. But I just go back to where I started, which is what an extraordinary guest list we have this evening. And I do hope that in the remaining time we have together, you might stay for some refreshments, some canapes, but also to meet each other. You're deliberately here as an extraordinary group. So I want to say thank you to the Centre for Entrepreneurs for our inaugural annual lecture, to all of the team and the supporters who have helped us be in this space, and what an iconic space this has been. And most of all to you for giving us your time, energy and location. And let's not keep it in this magical building. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to do what Eric has encouraged us to do. I don't envy the British entrepreneur on their way to the United States to give the equivalent pep talk. But between us, we've been given more than enough food for thought. Ladies and gents, on behalf of the Centre for Entrepreneurs, thank you and have a very good evening.